Hi everyone, it's Amy here and welcome to the final video in the Back to School Ready series. So if you have joined me for all the videos so far, videos 1 through to 9, then you have watched almost 4 hours worth of content, which is just crazy to think that I have put that much content out there. When I was first planning out this series and working out what video topics I was going to do, I was really trying to pick the ones that I thought would make the biggest impact for new graduates and the ones surrounding questions that I had when I was a new graduate, and just trying to pick the ones that would give you the best start to the year. And I knew when I did that the final video was going to be left for a Q&A session, because I knew there would probably be lots of other questions that you guys would have to do with topics that I hadn't covered, things that were maybe causing you concern, you just wanted to kind of flesh out a bit more or know a little bit more. So I have compiled some questions from you guys today about things that you would like to know, in addition to the other things that I covered in the video series. So the first question that I actually got from a lot of people was about my literacy groups and what the other students are doing while I am with my guided reading group. So with literacy groups, it's been quite a journey, and I think it's going to really depend on your own style of teaching and how you run your classrooms as to what's going to work for you. But I found out very early on that to really give my all to the group that I am with at guided reading, I had to have the rest of the class pretty much silent. I tried ones where they were playing literacy games, working together, collaborative things, but I just couldn't control the class like I wanted to, as in the noise level would rise and then I was feeling like I was always controlling behaviour. Or there would just be too much complication to the literacy games and the students would be asking me questions about how to play them. And I just really found that they weren't independent, and that with the noise level, I couldn't often hear the group that I was with if they were a quiet reader. My group couldn't focus because they were looking at what other kids were doing. It just felt like it wasn't the right time for those types of activities. So it did lead me down the track of about 3 or 4 years ago about making every single other activity independent and silent. And in addition to that, I didn't want to be planning 4 other activities in addition to the one that I was with every single day, every single week. So I wanted activities that could run smoothly without too much preparation on my behalf. So the first activity that I want to talk about is the guided reading one with me, because I don't do that the exact way that guided reading is meant to be done. Guided reading by definition is actually meant to be where the students read silently and then you ask them questions about what they read. And for me, a big part of reading is the oral part, is fluency, is expression, is hearing how the students are using decoding strategies and things like that. So for me, I do add that back in. I give the students time to read a passage by themselves. Depending on the text, it might be a page, it might be a paragraph. And then each student reads 1 sentence each, and after that sentence they tell me what they think that sentence means. Now that strategy comes from Sharp Reading, which is the text that I currently use with my upper students. So Sharp Reading is a program that comes from New Zealand, I believe, and they just have 1-page text that you give the students, which is awesome because it means that it's all digital and you just print off the amount of copies that you need for each group. And once you've printed all those copies off for 1 year, you just keep using them year after year after year. So I don't have to keep going to the library and finding new texts. I don't have to worry about whether another teacher's got the one that I want for that week. It's already in my classroom in just 6 files that are quite small, don't take up much room. So I love that, but they don't really go down to a level in lower primary. They do have 1 level, but they don't have the range really necessary for lower primary. So I do still use reading books with lower primary, but it is their strategy to get the students to read a sentence and then say what they think that sentence means in their own words. And then once we've finished a paragraph, I usually ask some questions about that in addition to what they've already comprehended per sentence. We also sometimes, depending on the topic, so if you've seen my term planners, you will know for my reading category that I have topics each week. I do them during guided reading most weeks. So if it says predicting on there, then I'm doing a predicting activity with my students before we move on to that guided reading component. Then another group is working on comprehension questions based on the text that they read with me the day before. I write those comprehension questions mostly myself. While Sharp Reading does have some comprehension questions that go with their text, I found that a lot of the time it didn't have the range that I wanted, going from, literal to inferential questions to evaluative to all the other types of comprehension questions you can have. I really wanted the range in there. So what I did to make it paperless, so I didn't have to be printing out a sheet every single week, was I used the app Seesaw. Seesaw is like an online portfolio for students, and you can actually give their parents access to it as well. So anything that they make on their iPads, including like pic collages and book creator things and keynotes and whatever else, they can all go on this app, so you can look at it, but you can also assign activities through this app where you write in almost like a Word document the questions out. The students then have access to that, and they can write their answers directly underneath your questions that you've written, and then they can submit it to you. So I love the fact that it's all paperless, love the fact that it's all set up, they're ready to go, and year after year I just have to access my activity library and just send out that activity to my current class of students. So because I started doing this approach back in 2018, in 2019 I used most of the same text, so I already had most of the questions there. And then this year going into 2020, I'll pretty much have everything done, and I shouldn't have to do anything new because I've already got all of that there. I then have another group that is on the iPads doing Study Ladder. Study Ladder is an online website where students can have their own account and they can go through all these different activities. It's not based in Australia, but they have aligned it to the Australian curriculum, which is amazing that they did that. And what I do sometimes is I go in there and I assign activities to them. So during reading literacy rotations, they have to pick one reading activity to do. And sometimes I'll also have grammar or vocabulary activities on there that relate to other things that we've been doing during that week in class. And then once they finish the assigned tasks that they have to do every week, they're allowed to just play the games that are on there, including numeracy games, which I have no problem with if they want to do some numeracy work during literacy rotations, as long as they are focused on that. The great thing about Study Ladder, if I didn't already say it, it's completely free to access most of the site, which is just, like I said, incredible. Then I have a group that is on reading boxes. So they're the comprehension boxes where they get out cards at their own level. They're on a certain color level and they read, they answer the questions that are in the booklet on a template page, and then they get the marking key for that and they mark their own work. That's completely independent. The only thing that I do on that is just check that they're going through them at a reasonable pace. So one card every 2 weeks is probably usually the expectation. If they're not keeping up with that, then I'm going to go and see them and find out what's going on, and maybe be watching them a little bit more carefully during literacy rotations to make sure they're actually working. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that I have 5 reading groups because I rotate the students through the activities over a course of a week. So I only see each group once a week as opposed to seeing every group every day. And that's another decision that I made earlier on, because I found that in trying to rotate them every day, trying to see every group every day, they weren't getting the quality of time with me that I wanted them to, and we were losing so much time in transition. And then I felt like most of my day was already gone and all I had done was literacy groups, and there is so much else to do. So rotating them through the week works fine with me. I spend about 15 to 20 minutes with each group, and that is really quality time from the start to the finish. That's hardcore, intense, guided reading time. So it works for me, it works for my students, and I'm seeing the results from doing that. And they are just as good, if not better than, trying to see every group every single day. It just wasn't worth the stress of doing it that way. So because I have 5 groups, I have to have 5 activities. So obviously one was with me, guided reading, one is doing the comprehension based on that, one is doing Study Ladder, and one is doing reading box, which leaves a 5th group. That has changed a lot for me over the years, but I've found in the last couple of years that it's a great time to spend working on whole school programs. So for a while there, we were a Words Their Way school, so that was going to be my Words Their Way day, where the students were doing the sorts that go with Words Their Way. And then we swapped to sound waves. So at the moment, that's the time when students spend on sound waves, doing the interactive activities on the online program to do with sound waves, and sometimes doing the independent activities that you can print off to do with sound waves. So that's my 5 groups. That's what they do. They are all independent. They are all doing them silently, and they get straight into it every week because they can look at my board to see what they need to do, and they just get straight into it. So there's no instructional time during my literacy rotations. When I say it's 20 minutes, it's okay guys, get into your groups. We start, and pack up is pack up. So it's really 20 minutes, 15 minutes, really intensive. That's it for reading groups. I hope I've answered all your questions there. So the next question I have came from somebody who was asking about catering for a large range of needs within a classroom. Now that is like a whole big concept, like you could do a big long video on that. There is so much to it, but for today's video I'm going to try and put it into a nutshell, but hopefully give you some actionable ideas for this. Now this particular person was also talking about the fact that they are in a composite classroom, so a multi-age group level classroom, and I just want to mention that I do have a PD session entirely devoted to how you can run a composite classroom and strategies for dealing with that, because I have had my fair share of composite classrooms, so I'll leave that link in the description, so make sure you check that out. Now, I also want to say that in a composite class, you can have just as big of a range as you can get in a normal straight class. You can have a student who is at kindy level and you can have a student who's at year 6 in 1 year. It doesn't matter whether you have a composite class or not. You are going to get ranges like that from time to time. So the first strategy that I have for you guys is an IEP, which I'm sure you've heard of. I'm sure you did some work on this in university. It is an individual education plan, and it's basically got a section for writing goals for the students at their level. You've got a space for strategies for how to teach that goal that they're working on, and then you have accountability section, like when are you going to reassess this? What's the timeline for getting it done? IEPs are best used when you do not feel that your normal everyday teaching is going to teach these students what they need to know. So say for example, if I'm in a year 5 class and I've got a student working on a year 1 level and they're still trying to learn their initial sounds, or their alphabetical sounds I should say, in that case I'm not going to be teaching sounds in my classroom, like at, but, not going to be doing it. So they would need to be on an IEP so that we know and we have identified clearly the goals they need to work on to get to the next step, and then planning some strategies around that. So looking up some games that they can play independently, some explicit instructions that you might be able to give them at times, and then trying to fit that into your schedule is obviously going to be a bit of an issue, but finding pockets of time is going to be your best strategy there. So maybe if you do reading comprehension as a whole class, once you've got the class set up and they're answering the questions, maybe you pull that student away for 10 minutes and you work with them intensely during that time. Even if it's 2 minutes intensely instructing them on that sound, and then they go off and they do their own activity so you can get back to the rest of the class. Finding pockets of time rather than trying to nut out a big chunk of time is going to be better for you, and if you can make it a regular occurrence, you're going to get into a better habit of using that time wisely. Now, IEPs aren't just used for weaker students, you can also use them for students who are way above the rest, but again, it's when you don't feel like you can do the content that they need within your usual lesson. But I will talk in a second about how you can make your lessons cater to a wider range of ability levels. So with an IEP, you want to make sure that the goals that you are setting for your students are achievable within a certain little amount of time. So I do my goals as term goals, so by the end of the term I would be expecting my students to achieve them. While that doesn't always happen because the students don't take up things as quickly as you might like, or a concept's harder than you think, on average they should be achieving most of them by the term. If you're writing an IEP and you don't think the students are going to achieve that thing by the end of the year, then your IEP goals are too big and you need to bring them down into smaller chunks. And make sure they are SMART goals, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. I think I may have got the A one wrong there, I might need to check that. But basically you don't want an airy-fairy goal like we'll write more by the end of the year. What does more actually mean and how are they going to achieve that? So saying something like they will know all 26 out of 26 sounds, that is a more specific goal. Or they will use full stops in their writing, or they will use adjectives within their writing. They are much more specific goals and are going to be easier to plan for. So now getting on to how you can make your activities cater for a wide range. This is called multiple entry points. And as much as possible, you want like 50% of your lessons every week to have this idea attached to them, this multiple entry points. So this is a lesson where a student who maybe can't write very much and a student who is writing amazing things can all achieve in the same lesson. So just a plain narrative lesson is a great example of this. So if you're telling your students that by the end of the lesson they're going to write a narrative that has a problem resolution, your weaker students, maybe you're only expecting them to write a sentence for the beginning, sentence for the problem, and a sentence for the conclusion. That's their little thing. Maybe you're giving them some extra help with that, like some prompt cards. And then your higher ability students, you're going to be pushing them to write like 2 pages, using paragraphs, using characterization, using figurative language. There is so much that students can do within that lesson, as opposed to a lesson where you're giving the students a worksheet and they either can or can't do it. So let's say you are doing multiplying large numbers, and on your sheet, that's all you have is a 2-digit multiplied by 2 digits. There's nothing else on that sheet. That's not catering for a wide range, because students will either be able to do it or not. To make that lesson cater for a wider range of abilities, you're probably going to start that worksheet off with some basic multiplication facts. Then you might be doing 2-digit by 1-digit multiplication, and then you might have 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication, which is your actual lesson point. And then at the bottom you might have a few challenges, like a 3-digit by a 3-digit multiplication. And so that's catering for a wider range, because those students who are still at the level of at learning just their basic multiplication facts are going to be able to spend the bulk of the lesson at that bit at the top. You know, you can throw manipulators at them and like be with them and modeling them, and your more able students are going to be extended on those questions at the bottom. So having lessons as much as possible that have those multiple entry points is going to make your life easier, especially for subjects that are not literacy in English. So your HASS lessons, your technology lessons, all of those, you want to make sure that every student in your class is able to do them on some level. And it may be about you being a resource to help achieve that. So giving them extra assistance when they need. Telling the rest of the class, you can go off and do that by yourself because I know you are capable of it, but maybe you're drawing a couple of students to work with you as a group, or you're doing some students one-on-one. Let's say in my reading comprehension, when I get to the stage at the end of the year where I want the students to just read the comprehension text by themselves and then answer the questions, but I still have 1 or 2 students who I know are not going to be able to read that comprehension text, I'm bringing them over to me, I'm sitting them in a desk and we're reading together, as opposed to giving them a different leveled text, which I could do, but that's going to be more difficult for me in the planning stages, trying to modify a text or trying to find a resource that includes modified text where they're working at different levels. Sometimes just using you as an extra resource to vary those activities is all you need. Also, varying your expectations of what the students are going to get done. So maybe you're doing a HASS lesson where they've got a retrieval chart and they're researching information off the internet. Maybe you're only going to expect your weaker students to have 1 fact each, whereas with your more able students, maybe the minimum for them is 3 facts for every section. Just varying your expectations and being able to clearly tell the students what your expectation is. So sometimes it might be telling the whole class, okay guys, this is the expectation. And then going to a couple of students and going, okay, so all I want from you today is just 1 sentence per box. That's all I need from you. Or going to your more, your higher student and challenging them, hey, I really want to see 5 facts from you for every single section here because I know that you can do it, push yourself to do it. And having the relationship with your students where you can go up to them and say things like that and they're going to be comfortable, and that the rest of the students understands that that is still you helping everybody and it's not you being unfair to particular students by saying they have to do more or less. It's just about you knowing your students well and what they need. So the other thing you want to do is vary the goals that you have each student working on. So each student is working within their zone of proximal development right at their targeted need. So in my diagnostic assessment video, I mentioned the writing goals poster that I have so that students know exactly what goal they're working on within writing. So I can tell my higher students to work on figurative language. That's what they need to do to take their writing to the next level. Whereas my weaker student is probably still working on maybe adding a capital letter at the beginning of every sentence. So each student is working right where they need to be. And to further this on, have some of your activities every week really dependent on a student's particular level. So an example of this would be my spelling program, where every single student in my class is on the level spelling list that they need to be at. So I could have 1 student working on level 13 and I can have 1 student working at level 100, rather than having the whole class on the exact same spelling list, or having, you know, like 3 different groups of spelling lists. Every student is working exactly where they need to be. It's very, very targeted. And in addition to that, the students can pass their spelling list whenever they want. So I have some students who cycle through a new list every 2 to 3 days because that's the pace they can maintain and retain those words. Whereas my weaker students might be passing a list every 1.5 weeks. And that's fine because they're all working where they need to be and they're all making progress in their own time at their own level. One of the arguments might be to having students working at their own level on their own thing is that they might get teased by other students for being on the level that they're on, but there's two ways to go around that. Number one is to have it very routine so the students know exactly what they're doing, so there's really no time to look at what another student is doing and what they're working on. They're actively engaged with what they're on, with their list, with achieving their goals, that they're not worried about the rest of the class, and they're not really going to think it through that, oh, they're only on that level, that means they're stupid. They're not going to have those thoughts. They're not going to have time to. And then also making sure that your classroom is a safe and supportive environment, making your students aware that different people have different needs and different abilities. And so those problems of students teasing one another shouldn't come up if you have a classroom that's supporting one another and celebrating achievements rather than looking at weaknesses. So to summarize this little nutshell that I have got for you guys is, first of all, have IEPs for those outlier students who are really weak or really strong. Have multiple entry points to your activity so students can work at their own level on the same activity that everybody else is doing. Vary the amount of assistance that you give some students, so use yourself as a resource within the classroom to help students work on the same work as everybody else. Vary your expectations of what the students are going to get done. So in my timetabling video, I mentioned that I have a finishing off time at the end of the week, and I said that we don't usually have much work to finish off. And one of those reasons is because whatever a student gets done during a lesson is what they get done on a worksheet, because my worksheets usually have, you know, the easy questions at the start to the harder questions, and I'm not expecting every student to get to the harder questions. I'm just expecting them to get up to wherever they get up to, as long as they're working hard. And you know, I can look at the sheet and go, yes, that was a good effort from you, then I'm happy with wherever they got up to on the worksheet. So varying your expectations, having goals for different students so they're all working at their own level, and for as many activities as you can during the week, especially the routine ones, have the activities at the student's level so they are very focused on where they're working at. I hope that kind of helps and gives you guys a way of working around having large needs in your classroom. But again, there is so much more to it that I could talk about. The next question I got asked about was how to program for English. Now, in my planning video, I did mention how I plan a unit, and that's pretty much the same as how I plan for English. So look at the outcomes that you are teaching, flesh them out, look at the elaborations, get an idea of what it is you actually want the students to learn, and then go searching for activities around that. So if you're doing text type lessons or something that you want a unit planner for, go and check out that video, work through those steps. But if you're talking about some of the more like specific explicit teaching, so let's say you're doing sounds or you're doing grammar or you're doing like something within that, for me, I make those lessons really simple. So sometimes it's explicit instructions, so I'm up at the board, I'm telling the students the information, then maybe they might work on a little worksheet or a little activity, and then we do a little conclusion plenary at the end of like summarizing what that information is. I try and keep those lessons really short and sharp so that I can do explicit teaching, because if you have lessons that go on for a really long time, nobody wants to hear their teacher droning on and on about a concept. So really short, sharp lessons, and then reviewing them frequently. I also got asked about NAPLAN and what advice I have for NAPLAN. And while NAPLAN is a very sensitive subject and people saying don't teach the test and rah, I do think we need to set the students up for success with NAPLAN, and I think we need to get into their head and develop their mindset about testing before they have a chance to have negative experiences and connotations with testing. Because for most students, NAPLAN is really going to be the first time that they're really doing intensive testing. So what I do is during the first week or two of school, when I have a year 3 class, is I do tell them, yep, we're doing NAPLAN this year. I tell them that it's just, you know, a bunch of tests that don't mean anything. Once you've done them, you can get them out of your head. I tell them that it's not a reflection of them, it's a reflection of the school and how well the school is doing. And then I also tell them that the style of the test means that you're not expected to get 100% right. You are not expected to get every single question right on NAPLAN. You're just expected to do the best that you can. And if we start getting that mindset into their head, then by the time the testing comes, they're not as scared of it because it doesn't mean so much to them. Some parents can put a lot of pressure on their students to do with NAPLAN, and you really want to get into their head before that. So one of the things I do is introduce testing strategies each week in year 3 and in year 5 to help the students cope with the test. So there's working through at a reasonable pace. So halfway through the test, you should be halfway through the questions in most cases. Things like reading the questions carefully, eliminating answers, just little strategies that we might think as adults are obvious in a test, you've got to teach those to students, and they just help the students cope during testing. If you have seen my term planners for year 3 and 5, you will see the strategies down the side, and I usually cycle through about one every 2 weeks. The way that I do that is I present the strategy to the students, I explain how it works, I explain the logic behind it, I give them some examples if I can, and then I have NAPLAN quizzes for year 3s and year 5s that review the work that we've done that week for grammar, spelling, and maths. So it's just a couple of questions, I think like 10 to 12 questions on there. They work through, they answer as many as they can, try and use the strategy if they can that we've talked about, and then as they finish, I mark the questions. If they get one wrong, I send them back to their desk to do it again. When I have about half the class lined up saying that they're, needing it marked or finished, we stop it as a whole class. That's usually about 10 to 15 minutes later, depending on the class's ability, and then we mark it as a whole class. We go through, we talk about strategies of how to get the answer, and then I might collect them at the end and kind of have a look at how students have done on the concepts for that week, but I don't give too much weight to it, and I definitely don't give them a score back. They've marked their own so they have an idea of how well they did, and that just gives them a sense of what the test is going to be like, of how to answer the different questions, so they're not in the middle of the test going, well, what's a multiple choice question? What, I only need to circle one answer? Like, just those kind of little things that you need to teach them. This also gives them a really good feeling about NAPLAN, because often those questions there's a lot of simple ones in there, so they get them right and they feel like they're accomplished, like, oh, NAPLAN's going to be easy because I got all these questions right. So it gives them a good mind space for it. And then usually in the week before NAPLAN, I do give them a sample test, either the maths one or the reading one, just so they can get a feel for how long the test is and how to space out their timing. And yeah, it gives them a better idea, so they're not coming in on NAPLAN week all scared. They know exactly what to expect. And again, I don't feel like this is teaching to the test, this is teaching them how to do a test. And it just helps set them up, I think, for the rest of their life. Like, NAPLAN is bad. If I could get rid of it, I would. But because we have to have it, we have to try and turn it into some sort of a good thing, some sort of a benefit from it. And one that I see is giving them the mindset that, a test is just a test. You do your best work on it, giving them the strategies for how to do it. So one day when they're year 11 and 12 testing, or when they're at tertiary education, they're doing exams, they've already been set up for success and they have a good mentality to do with testing. I do have a blog article on NAPLAN advice, so I will link that above as well. The next question I had was coming from a person who had a set of students last year and then they're repeating with some of those students again this year. That was me last year. In 2018, I taught a year 4-5 split, and then I had about 7 of those year 4s back as year 5s last year. And she was talking about how hard it is to try and make the lessons different for the students. And my answer to that is don't. You don't need to. I taught the exact same text type units with my my 5s that repeated, and they were fine. If anything, it's a good thing because they're repeating the same activities, but they're getting different things out of it. Especially if your lessons have multiple entry points where the students are achieving at their own level, they're going to take that lesson to the next bar. They're going to take it to the next level and push themselves and challenge themselves to get more out of it. So I found that those 7 students who repeated with me did so much better on their text types than the students who hadn't had me the year before. They were able to achieve more, and I was able to push them further because they were doing the same thing for the second time, but hearing different things, getting different things out of it. Also, the way that I do my planning, because I have my term planners and it's very locked in when I'm doing the different text types, when I'm doing particular topics, by the time we came back to repeat a lesson, it was a year since they had done it, so a lot of the stuff they didn't really remember. I didn't remember well enough to care that they were doing it again. And if your lessons are engaging and fun, again, they're not going to care that they're doing it again. There was a couple of times when students were like, oh, this lesson again. And I was like, just grin and bear it, guys, get through it, it's one lesson. And like I said, like that rarely ever happened. It was maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. There were a couple of lessons that I did skip completely and didn't do because, like the punchline was ruined from it. So some of the class challenges I didn't do again because they had an unfair advantage. But for the most part, I just repeated almost the exact same thing. I did have some units that were completely different. For example, HASS, because my students had for the majority of the time done Year 4. HASS, because of the way sport had worked, I had half the class taken out so I could work with the other half in my class doing HASS. So they didn't repeat HASS, which was nice. Technologies was a little bit of an overlap. I think they did 1 or 2 of the units the same, 2 of them were different just because of the way that I had planned it. So don't feel like you need to change up everything. Don't feel like you need to make everything different. Your students can survive doing the same activities again, and it can be beneficial. The last question I got was in relation to assessing. When you assess a student and you get data from them, how do I store all the data? So firstly, I have 2 folders like this at school. One is assessment and one is for my planning documents. So I love these files here without the little hinges that display files usually have, because they don't break as easy. But at the end of the year, I do swap it out of these files and I do put them into a display file that I've got at home, which are these kind of clippy bits. And I put all my planning and all my assessing into the one file. So this is the 2017 grading file. Yep, 2017 grading file. So everything is in this. It's all put together. So if I ever need to go back and check my planning or any of my assessment documents, I have it all in one file, but this isn't exactly how it is usually laid out in my classroom. I do not have my 2019 one here to show you because I left it at school. So, oh well. I do use tabs to break up the file, and I just gauge them roughly. So I know that I'm going to need some room at the front for reports. So I have like checklists in there for what grades I gave them in semester 1 and semester 2. Then I have English, and I have a whole heap of empty sleeves for English. Then I do maths, I leave a whole heap of empty sleeves for maths. And then I have the rest of my subjects, and I'll only leave about like 2 or 3 pages for them because I know I won't need much room for them. And then I just slot all of my checklists in under the different subject. So if I do a South Australian spelling test at the beginning of the year, I'll slot that into one of the English slots. If I do a rubric with a student, I don't keep the individual rubrics, they go into their own portfolios, but I will copy it across into a checklist, and the checklist will go in here. Now obviously this is real student data, so I can't really flip through and show you exactly what all these look like, but basically it's just a whole heap of checklists in here and some anecdotal records. You can see though by the thickness, like I take a lot of records, but it's not overly cumbersome, because again, this is the planning in here as well, which takes up a big chunk of room at the back. I also have IEPs and things in here, so it's not all of this is assessing. Another thing is color code as much as possible. So when you have marked something, have colors for different scores. So if they achieved where you wanted them to but weren't exceptional, I usually do that as green. If they were below, I do that as pink because it really stands out. And purple is usually my top color because, you know, I love purple. So purple usually goes at the top, and I can just look at that at a glance and kind of get overall class data just by glancing at it and going, oh, there's a lot of green there, or oh, there's a lot of pink there, I need to work on that. So that is where I keep all my assessing stuff. So that is all the questions that I got through for this video, which means that we have now come to the end of the Back to School Ready series. Couple of things before you go, if you can just stay with me. Number one, this is not the end of the group. The group will stay around indefinitely, and I would love for you to come into the group whenever you need anything, any questions ever during the year. Come in, ask everybody. I will be there to still help you out. If you don't feel comfortable posting in the group, then send me a message, and sometimes I will reply in there. Sometimes I might tell you that let's do a video on that concept because it's a really big one, and then I'll put some videos into the group. So I really want the group to stay active, and I really want to help continue on this journey with you guys and help you out throughout the year. So please let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. If there is something that comes up during the year that you want to know more about, please reach out to me. Again, there should be a link above to how you can get a PD certificate and the information that you need to send me in order to get that. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video series. It has been just a whirlwind 2 weeks. I can't believe that it is already over. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this video series, and I'll catch you around. Bye!